I think the analogy of Legos is very apt. You have Legos called monosaccharides. Monosaccharides, they come in different colors, shapes, and sizes. And depending on the color, shape, and size determines how is your body able to use it. All of the Legos have to be converted into glucose. Everyone got to get paid. Two Legos joined together are called a disaccharide. Multiple sugars joined together are called a polysaccharide. And what we need to do is we need to be able to break. Okay, guys, let's take the next couple of minutes and finish up our talk about all of the animals being adopted on campus. And then we can start talking about carbohydrates. So no, that's okay. No apologies. No apologies needed, you guys. Let's get it all out of our system. Let's take a couple of minutes. I will go see if I can find Poppy and show you Poppy. And you guys go ahead. Seriously, this is not an angry me. This is when I see, especially on Fridays, and you just had a midterm, I see that you guys weren't finished, and that's okay. Let's take a couple of minutes and just, if there are any other questions that anyone has, I want to make sure that we address them. Our animals are the cornerstone of our program. And I desperately, desperately love that you guys are already so passionate as young up and coming technicians that you have this kind of enthusiasm for our animals. That's amazing. That's exactly what I'm looking for in a trainee for a technician. So I'm going to pause. Our bodies need to break the Legos apart in order to use them. I'm not telling you any shocking revelations. So the liver is what converts all of our nutrients either into glycogen. Remember, glycogen was pre-converted. It's the stuff she puts under her desk for a rainy day, just in case. Or she'll convert it into glucose and send it out into circulation. Or she will send it to the storage unit and it'll be stored as adipose tissue. That's kind of the basics behind our carbohydrates. So what happens is, and we talked about this yesterday, when your blood glucose gets used up, right, you have this currency circulating, insulin is pulling that glucose out of the blood and delivering it into the tissue. As you are delivering it to the tissue, the levels of the glucose in your blood start to drop. And then I did this whole, like, one person, one act play about what happens, how your brain starts turning stuff off and making decisions because you no longer have the energy needed to keep all of the lights on. It takes time to break down or catabolize that adipose tissue. And so in the meantime, what we have is glycogen. Glycogen is kind of, for lack of a better definition, pre-converted glucose. And it is stored in the liver, and we can convert it super fast and dump it into the blood to raise the blood glucose and give us a little bit of a time window so that we can catabolize that adipose and convert it into usable energy and then sustain ourselves. So when you get that rush, when you get that second wind, when you get past hitting the wall, that's your liver dumping glycogen into your bloodstream. Now, here's a little bit of fun, fascinating trivia that is kind of a true world. You can relate with the dumping of the glycogen other than just getting a second wind. How many people, show of hands or do the little hand icon, raise your hand. How many people, and this is bizarre because I'm willing to bet it's most of you, how many people commonly wake up spontaneously about 3 o'clock in the morning? Look at the hands going up. That's crazy. Why? 9 participants have used the icon. 10. Me is 11. The demon hour is what we even call it. 12. Look at this. And I'm willing to bet a lot of you just raised your hands. That's crazy. Same time every night, right about 3 o'clock. So here's the physiology behind it. Here's the theory, the theoretical theory. Okay, now obviously, do you have the conspiracy theorists? Well, we do call it the demon hour because it's thought that the reason you wake up is because that something or someone is watching you. We have that little sixth sense when somebody is looking at you. We've all done it, looked at the car next to us or detected someone staring at us from across the room. So one of the conspiracy theories is that there is a demon who has been released and is now watching you in your sleep, and that wakes you up. Now, there's a much more plausible reason behind it. And I'm not talking about the reason that we're all living in a computer simulation and 3 o'clock is the time that the giant world computer has to reboot and do an update. And it causes all of us to reset. That is, in fact, another theory. Okay, but here's what is actually happening. So you ate dinner about 6 o'clock, let's say. On average, we all eat dinner approximately the same 2-hour window, 3-hour window, between 5 and 8 o'clock. Your stomach is full, your sorting tables are full, your brain is being told that it is full. So your small intestines, even when you go to bed, are still working, still working, still working. And so what ends up happening is you get this huge spike in blood glucose and it starts to level off. And then right about 6 to 8 hours after you ate, guess what has happened to your circulating blood glucose? It's dropped. So what does your liver do? Dumps a whole buttload of glycogen, which causes a massive spike in blood glucose, which causes your brain to go, turn on all of the lights. And it does. And your heart starts to speed up. And it's just like you getting past the wall, getting your second wind, but you were asleep. But your heart speeds up, your breaths speed up, and your brain activity. You go into a light REM sleep, which is why usually your most vivid dreams seem to be right before you wake up. So there, glycogen. That's the physiology. Although I do kind of like the idea that we're all living in a computer simulation.
Miss Huff.
Yes.
Would that be like somewhat of the reason why majority of people, like right when they wake up, they use the restroom? Because of that, basically?
Well, and also because you haven't peed in 6 to 8 hours. And your bladder.
Yeah, that's what I was, yeah.
So it's your bladder, just like your stomach, has a stretch receptor. And when it gets to a certain fullness, the stretch receptor tells your brain, hey, we're going to need to find an appropriate place to empty this, or you're just going to pee. And so when your brain is now waking up, and your bladder goes, oh, okay, you're turning all the lights on, sensor, 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 sensor. And then you have to go pee. So
I wanted to ask, can that make you sleepwalk and or talk in your sleep during that period?
So not really. Sleepwalking and sleep talking are two sleep abnormalities that don't really have anything to do with the nutritional dumping of glycogen into the blood. All right, let's talk about fiber. Fiber, we discussed yesterday, is one of the perfect nutrients. We have it divided into soluble and insoluble, meaning able to be broken down, not able to be broken down. Now, we don't really get any energy from fiber. We don't. There are species, we talked yesterday about our polygastric animals that do use the fermentation of fiber to produce glucose. We do not. We do not. So in us and dogs and cats, the primary function of fiber is to help to bulk up the feces. Small intestines can't really do anything with it, so it does slow everything down. You eat a big fibrous meal, and it sits on the small intestinal sorting tables for a long period of time, because our small intestines are like, and it slows everything down, which will slow the uptake of glucose into the blood, which is a whole other thing we'll talk about. Once the fiber has reached the colon, though, it hasn't given us any energy, but the colon uses it to decrease his workload. The whole job of the colon is to bulk up stool and help to regulate water. Because remember, when your Chipotle burrito gets to your colon, it's still liquid. It is still complete liquid. And so in order to get that nice semi-solid, your colon's going to suck out water. Well, fiber helps to already bulk up the stool. That makes the job much easier. Fiber is also nutrition for your colonocytes. Your colonocytes use it to stay healthy. And in fact, there have been a lot of studies done with the role of this complex fibrous carbohydrate and the role in decreasing the incidence of colon cancer. Yeah. So fiber is wonderful for treating all kinds of gastrointestinal disorders. You can feed fiber if you have diarrhea. You can also feed fiber if you have constipation, because we have multiple different types of fibers that your body will use differently. So depending on the type of fiber, it can really resolve almost any large intestinal issue.
So
It
is that
also,
why people, or sorry.
no,
sorry,
go
what?
ahead, Lizzie. No, go ahead.
Is that why people feed like dogs and cats pumpkin when they're constipated and stuff?
Boo, boo, boo. Yes. Pumpkin, beet pulp,
Prune juice.
yeah, prunes. So prunes are one that help to resolve constipation. Pumpkin and beet pulp are helping to resolve diarrhea. Corn, the most common fiber found in almost every single pet food. Corn is just a complex carbohydrate. It is not used efficiently by the body. It does not give us any calories, and it helps to bulk up the stool. So people who are saying, you know, ooh, don't feed pet food with corn. No, it's not necessarily a bad food if it contains corn. Corn is cheap. Corn is a very cheap fiber. That's it. And we need fiber in the diet. So there you go. So how does fiber decrease digestibility and help with constipation? So When you are constipated, what has happened is you have hard, dry feces that is not moving through the colon. And the longer it sits there, the harder and drier it gets. Some of these fibers help to retain water in the feces. They bulk it up, but not so. Normally, without excess medicinal fiber, you eat food, it gets to your colon, it's super liquid, and so your colon starts just sucking water, and you end up with this shrink down of dehydrated poo. And that's what gives us the semi-solid poo that we have. What happens is when we feed fiber for constipation, it helps to retain the water because the feces is already bulked up without pulling the water out. And because it's now a larger, softer feces, the strength of the peristaltic contractions increases and helps to move it through much more efficiently. Fiber, magic. The other thing that fiber does is it decreases the digestibility and bioavailability. Remember, guys, these were two words we learned at the beginning of the chapter. Digestibility, how easy is it for your body to break it apart? Bioavailability, how much energy am I getting from it? Well, if anyone has ever eaten corn, you know what happens to you 2 or 3 days later. You get corn poo. You get corn poops. Yes, I went there. I went to corn poo. Because your body doesn't break it down and it doesn't use it. So when your body does not break stuff down, we say it has a low digestibility. And when you don't get a lot of energy, when your body doesn't use a whole lot of it, low bioavailability. And so it fills us up without having the calories. It increases peristaltic contraction. It slows the uptake of blood or glucose into the bloodstream. It helps to bulk up our stool in the colon. Fiber. Okay, I know Doug is off the wheel right now. Doug is just having his own day. Just saying. All right. Let's talk about 2 specific health conditions other than constipation and diarrhea. Let's talk about 2 specific health concerns that we can help to resolve with fiber. The first one, diabetes. How is fiber involved in the role of diabetes? So I am going to do this.
Does it help with the breakdown or the increase of like sugar in the body?
It does. So here's what we're looking at. I have a diabetic animal. Now, there are multiple types of diabetes. We have diabetes mellitus, we have diabetes insipidus. And you don't have to frantically write this down. It's just so you've heard these words before. Diabetes mellitus is a pancreatic issue. Diabetes insipidus is a kidney issue. We're dealing with the pancreatic issue, the one where you have to give injections of insulin. Diabetes mellitus also has a couple of different forms. You have type A and type B. Type 1 and type 2, sorry, type 1 and type 2. In one of these types, type 1, your pancreas does not produce any insulin. It is a complete absence of insulin. And there's nothing you can do nutritionally to resolve that. That animal is going to be on injections for the rest of its life, because insulin, here's my blood vessel, and I have my blood glucose, and I have my cell, and the insulin takes the glucose out of the blood and delivers it to the cell. Without blood glucose, that doesn't happen. And that's a problem, because now he's not getting paid. Type 2 diabetes means that we are producing insulin, just not enough. So what we can do with type 2, and cats are most likely to have type 2, dogs are most likely to have type 1. So if my pancreas is producing some insulin, what I can do is, if I can slow the uptake of glucose into the blood, the insulin has a chance to remove it and prevent it from having major spikes. So let me explain what I'm talking about. My diabetic animal has a meal. And immediately my small intestines start throwing glucose to the liver, or nutrients to the liver. The liver immediately starts dumping massive amounts of glucose into the blood, but the insulin is not sufficient to get it out, at least not efficiently, and you get this massive glucose spike. And what goes up must come down. And so you get this very dramatic, it's called a peak and trough. And then you feed them again, and they have a massive spike and a massive drop off. Feed them again, and you can see this massive spike and drop off is not healthy. Anything in excess can cause damage. What do we want to see? We want to see the animal eats, the blood glucose is slowly taken into the bloodstream and then slowly used, and we have this nice round curve. We can accomplish this by giving insulin, right? You give insulin here, you feed the animal, and the insulin is now removing the glucose as the levels raise, and that causes the level to rise much more gently. If I feed fiber, the same thing happens. I add fiber to the diet, and the fiber now slowly, because remember, our digestive system is now slowed down because the small intestines are having to work harder. So my intestines slowing down, slowing the nutrients going to the liver, which then slows the liver's ability to convert it into usable energy, which slows the uptake into the bloodstream. And the small amount of insulin that we are producing is then able to keep up and get it out of the blood into the tissue and give us this nice, gentle blood glucose rise. What questions can I answer for you about blood glucose and fiber's role?
Is that why whenever you find out that your animal is diabetic, they have to figure out what kind of range of insulin they're going to have? So you have to like go in, I think, what is it, every couple of days to make sure that they're regulated?
Yeah. So what you're looking for when you are first diagnosing a diabetic is how much insulin is going to prevent that significant blood glucose spike. Because I don't want super, super high glucose. This glucose, let's say normal glucose is 80. This glucose in some of our animals who are diabetic can go over 300. That's toxic. I know you don't think of sugars as a potential toxin. Anything at this level is a toxin. So what we need to do is find out when I give the insulin, then what I do is I take an initial blood glucose, which tells me what was the blood glucose before eating. Okay. Nothing has gone into the blood yet. This is my baseline. Then I feed the animal, and I'm going to take a blood glucose every 2 hours. And what I'm doing is I'm tracking, and then I can see this amount of insulin. I'm just pulling numbers, Faith. I'm just pulling numbers out of the sky. This amount of insulin allowed my glucose to peak at 180 before it started dropping. Well, I now know this is still high. It's lower than it was. So a couple of days later, what am I going to do? I'm going to increase the amount of insulin.
Miss
Yes.
you froze after you said that you were just pulling numbers.
Oh, okay. So this amount of insulin here, what I do then is I'm looking to see where is the highest number that this goes before it starts to drop. Well, this number, let's just say, got as high as 180. Still high. It's not 300 high. So what that tells me is I need to increase the amount of insulin, and I need to increase the amount of fiber in the diet. So when I increase the amount of insulin, now it's pulling the glucose, pulling the glucose, pulling the glucose. And now I stabilize, I peak at 80 before I start to fall. Now I know that's the exact right amount of glucose or insulin to give. And then I'll periodically check it. And that's why you need to check the blood glucose, usually right before and then several hours after you eat, to see if you need to supplement with more insulin. So diabetes is a really fascinating, very fascinating health
I had a
condition.
question.
Yeah.
What is like the normal range for passengers?
The normal what, Charles? I'm sorry.
I think he's trying to say what's the normal levels for blood sugar within the animals.
Oh, so it's really going to depend on the species. It's even going to depend a little bit on the breed. On average, you're going to be looking at blood glucose around 80. Anything greater than 100 is where we're getting into not concern, but we got to remember there's also a ton of stuff that can artificially increase the glucose. So us as technicians need to take that into consideration. If you're drawing blood from an animal who has fought you the whole way and is super stressed and is super, aggressive and trying to run away, well, what do you think stress does? It takes a lot of energy. Your body's going to be dumping a ton of glucose into your blood. So when you have an animal start to stress out, it's going to artificially raise the blood glucose and make this test invalid. So a lot of things to take into consideration when we're doing a blood glucose. Now, insulin is the thing that takes the glucose out of the blood and allows us to maintain a nice, gentle curve. Fiber does essentially the same thing. If I have some insulin being produced, I add fiber. Now, fiber's not going to increase the rate that the glucose is being removed from the blood. It's going to decrease the rate that the glucose is entering the blood. Much slower entrance. The insulin I have is able to keep up. We have a nice normal high number. So if I want to put this into words, for those of you that are a little more analytical, the role of fiber in the diabetic diet slows digestion, which in turn slows the uptake of glucose into the blood, which will help stabilize blood glucose levels by preventing prandial blood glucose spikes.
So in cats that, let's say, are going through like anorexia or are on in hour 48 of having not eaten, would fiber be something detrimental to give to them?
Yes, it's fiber, although yes is magic, there are times when it would be contraindicated. If you have an animal with a small intestinal disorder, and that's really the key, Hannah, you have just hit the nail on the head. We've got to figure out what is wrong with this animal before we can start taking steps to support it nutritionally. If I have an animal with a small intestinal disorder, well, first off, what do the small intestines do? Break apart and absorb nutrients. Do I really want to give them something that's going to make their job 10 times harder if they already don't feel good? No. What do you want to do when you don't feel good? You want to curl up in your bed and you want to watch Netflix all day. That's essentially what I want to do to my intestines. When they don't feel good, I want to decrease their job. I want to decrease their workload and give them a bed rest day. Okay, obviously, literally, I can't give them a bed rest day. But what I can do is give the small intestines things that are super, super, super easy to break down. Fiber would not be good if a small intestine is having a disorder. If a large intestine is having a disorder, what? Have at it. Add all the fiber you want, because again, large intestine doesn't feel good. I need to take down his workload. What does the large intestine do? Regulates water and bulks up stool. That's exactly what fiber can do. So if I add fiber to a large intestinal diet, that will take down his workload. Now it'll increase the workload for the small intestines, decrease the workload for the large intestines. So before I start deciding if I'm going to add fiber and then what kind of fiber, I first need to know what is happening inside the body, because I cannot make that decision. And so for every animal, it's normal for your blood glucose to increase after you have eaten. But in a non-diabetic person or animal, your body is able to increase the production of insulin, which increases the removal of blood glucose out of the blood, which prevents you from having that dramatic high spike. Does that make sense? Yes.
So why in like livestock animals do they feed them like a mix of feed with corn?
So equine and food animals have completely different, not only nutritional needs, but anatomical makeup. Now, they still need protein, carbohydrates, fats, water, vitamins, minerals. All of the nutrients are the same. The form that they get them is different. Remember, our polygastric animals get fed nothing but fiber because they are able to break down that fibrous plant material. And then again, depending on the type of plant material. In equines, there are so many different types of grasses. There's alfalfa, there's bahia, there's bahama, There's legume. Those are only 4. But each one of these breaks down differently and provides a different level of crude protein, calcium, phosphorus, and conversion fermentation into glucose. Now, horses are different because they don't have the multiple stomach chambers to bounce back and forth. They have what's called Deanna, bam. They use their hind gut called the cecum as kind of a second stomach. Horses are not technically polygastric. They have their forestomach, fore meaning towards the head, and they have their hind gut. And the cecum, where the cecum in me is simply an attachment point between my small and large intestine. In horses, it's ginormous. And that's where any grasses or grains go, and they get kind of stored there. And it allows a much longer time for the horse digestive system to glean whatever nutrients we need to get before it gets moved on to the colon. So, holy smokes, Lizette, you've just brought back my PTSD of this stupid equine nutrition class. I need a moment. Okay. Does that answer your question though, Lizette? Okay. So on your carbohydrates test, if I were to ask you in a short answer question, discuss the role of fiber in the diabetic diet. 1, 2, 3 points right here. Fiber slows down the digestion. It slows the uptake of glucose into the blood, and it stabilizes the levels by preventing those postprandial, meaning after eating, blood glucose spikes. 1, 2, 3. You'd say a version of these 3 things, and you will get full points on the short answer question, if there is one. Could I literally wrote it down right here, Lizette. Can you not see my whiteboard? Can you guys see the whiteboard?
Yeah, I could.
Okay, so it's the
see
words
it.
right. It slows digestion. It slows the uptake of glucose into the blood. It stabilizes blood glucose levels by preventing postprandial blood glucose spikes. This is the role of fiber in the diabetic diet. Alondra, you're going to learn all about large animal nutrition, but the way that we have split it up is instead of having every species in a single nutrition class, like what it was when I was in college, nightmare, you are going to get equine nutrition when you get to equine class and food animal nutrition when you get to food animal class. Savannah, you would not get it wrong if you don't word it exactly the same. It's not going to be, you know, if you add a word here or there. However, you need to not change the meaning of the definition. So if you just say, if I asked, what is the role of fiber in the diabetic animal? And you just said it stabilizes blood glucose, that would be wrong. I know it stabilizes blood glucose. I'm asking about how does fiber contribute to that? And yes, Leanna, postprandial does mean after post, after. Prandial is a medical term for eating. Any other comments, questions, concerns about any of this? Yeah, phage is another word for eating as well. Oh, excuse me. All right, here we go. So it stabilizes the blood sugar by slowing the uptake of glucose, by slowing digestion, and preventing those postprandial glucose spikes. Here we just talked about our ruminants and how ruminants do have bacteria that ferment the fiber. And that's why cows can live on pasture grass and hay. I can't go out and eat hay and grass from my backyard and expect to get nutrition, because I'm lacking the type of bacteria that our cows have that allow us to ferment that cellulose into glucose. And I think I talked yesterday a little bit about an interesting health issue that can happen with our cows, where something might happen and it kills off the bacterial colony. Without that bacteria, they can't ferment the fiber. And without that fermentation process, they don't get glucose. And even though the cow may not change the amount that they're eating, it's as if they're starving to death because they don't get any nutrition out of it. Yeah, one of the things, Lizette, would be antibiotics. So as far as the specific types and nutritional contents of the grasses, we are not going into the polygastric animal. Non-polygastric, so monogastric dogs and cats, they don't really have a food that is involved with wheatgrass. That's not something usually that we add. It's not one of the common fibers.
I asked just because I know a lot of people like to eat wheatgrass. Like, you know, how people juice wheatgrass. That was like a thing for a long time. So I wondered if they also did that for animals.
They do not. Wheatgrass in humans was a huge fad. There were a couple of different reasons, although honestly, I have no idea why. I tried it once. I couldn't even swallow it. It tastes like what I would imagine urine-soaked lawn clippings would taste like. If you've ever had it, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. Sean, you go right ahead, have my serving. I hand it over willingly because it's so gross. So I don't know why they would drink wheatgrass juice, because there's no fiber. The fiber comes from the frond being the blade of grass. Literally all you did was, okay, so now I'm off on a tangent. Gosh darn it, Alexis. Plant cells are different than mammal cells. We know that mammal cells have organelles, although this would have been helpful before you had, let me get this. All right, so this is kind of interesting though. So mammal cells have a nucleus, they have their organelles, organelle, and they have these tiny vacuoles, right? The vacuoles are voids. They trap foreign invaders, they help to transport stuff, blah, blah, blah. Actually, let me do this, clear out drawings. Plant cells look more square. And plant cells don't have the same organelles. They have these incredibly large vacuoles. And these large vacuoles store water and, oh my goodness, chlorophyll. I almost said chloroform. Nope, that's not what I meant. Chlorophyll, which gives the plant its green and helps it to convert the sunlight and the nutrients from the soil into energy. Well, when you are, so now I have a wheatgrass frond, and this is one of the cells. And when I take that wheatgrass frond and I squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it, all I'm doing is rupturing and having this plant water drain out. I don't really understand the benefit of that. If anybody else knows the benefit of drinking plant water, speak up now, because I have no idea. There's nothing nutritional. If I were to eat the frond, then I would at least be getting the fibrous fibers from the frond, which would cause my digestion to slow and slow the uptake of glucose, etc., etc. Keep me feeling full longer by not providing me any nutrients. I don't understand why drinking plant water is going to do anything for me. So that's all I know about that. All right. Get back in here. So the other disease that I do want to touch on, although I have already done this, so we've discussed now the role of fiber in the diabetic diet, but we also have the role of fiber in the obese management diet. So if I have an animal who wants to lose weight, what are my goals? Feed them less calories, right? Feed them less energy. Cause them to use more energy than they're taking in. Try and keep them feeling full. That's exactly what, oh, that's fine, Rachel. That's exactly what fiber does in the overweight animal. Fiber increases the amount of energy that your body has to use to try and break it down. It decreases the number of calories that you're taking in. So if your energy levels are going up, but the calories coming in are going down, where do we get the difference? From the belly, from the fat stores. And then the third thing is it maintains the feeling of being full. The word for that is satiety or satiety. To be satiated, to be satisfied. Satiety is the act of being satisfied. So if I want to, for you guys that are, so to have an animal gain weight, so there's two factors for gaining or losing weight. How much energy is being used, how much energy is coming in. If I have more energy coming in and less energy being used, the difference, so I have this much energy coming in and this much energy being used, the difference goes to the storage unit. So the plus minus meant maintain. It doesn't gain, it doesn't lose, it maintains. So if I am using this much energy, but I'm only bringing in this many calories, the difference has to come from the storage unit. So the idea is any kind of excess of energy goes into the storage. Any kind of deficiency in energy comes out of the storage. So when I am asking what is the role of fiber in the obese management diet, it increases the energy being used because your small intestine is having to work much harder, right? That's the whole idea, is It's expending a lot of energy focusing on trying to break down this unbreakdownable thing. It decreases the amount of calories coming in, and it maintains satiety, or the feeling of being full. Because the longer that this stuff sits in the small intestines, the longer your brain gets the message, don't bring any more, don't bring any more, don't bring any more. So with these 3 points, and again, am I going to ask that you word for word? No. If you say some way, shape, or form of these 3 points, it increases the amount of energy being used. And that's foods that are labeled for an active dog would have higher amounts of calories. Active dog is using this much energy, but your average adult maintenance is only using this much energy. So when you feed an active formula, it now provides the amount of energy we need, so we're not gaining or losing weight. Nutrition. All nutrition is, what am I trying to accomplish and what can I provide to do that? Fiber does not contain a whole lot of calories. So if I feed a large amount of fiber, I'm not feeding any calories. So the overall calories of the food goes down, but the amount of work that my body has to use to break it down goes up. If I'm using this much energy and taking in this much energy, I have a deficit. I got to pull the deficit out of the storage unit to match the energy that I need. And the longer it sits in the small intestines, the longer I feel full. Which is why if you've ever been on a diet, you tend to eat foods that are very high in fiber, right? You eat kale, you eat salad, you eat celery. You can have things like almonds as a protein source. Very, very fibrous, because the exact same premise is happening in trying to lose weight, whether you're a human, a dog, a cat. You have to take in less energy than you're using. That's the whole point. There's one final slide here that we'll just finish up on. This is a chart that I got out of Big Bertha, your textbook. I think it's on 283. Double check me, I'm not sure. It will be in that chapter. And this is just different types of fibers and whether or not they are soluble or insoluble. And some of them, depending on where they are in the intestine, could be both. So psyllium can be soluble and insoluble depending on where it is. I will warn you that some really great, Doug's making a mental note right now, you guys, matching questions. I'm smelling matching questions. Which of the following is a monosaccharide or a disaccharide? And I will list out all of these, write A for monosaccharide, B for disaccharide. And another great matching question would be this. If I listed out the different types of fibers and asked if they were soluble or insoluble. Oh no, you don't want Doug to stop. I can stop telling you test questions. I can stop telling you test questions that are already written into the test. Happy to. Don't think you want me to. All right, you guys, that's it for today. That is it for today. Let me